On February 17, 1944, the most devastating naval attack since Pearl Harbor was about to unfold. But this time, the roles were completely reversed. The hunter had become the hunted, and Japan was about to experience its own Pearl Harbor nightmare in the most catastrophic way imaginable. What you're about to discover is the dark and terrifying story of Operation Hailstone, the deadliest two-day naval assault that turned Japan's impregnable fortress into an underwater graveyard and changed the course of World War II forever. Deep in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, over 500 miles southeast of Guam, lies one of nature's most perfect naval strongholds. Truk Lagoon, known today as Chuuk, stretches across 800 square miles of crystal-clear water, protected by a massive coral barrier reef that forms an almost impenetrable wall 140 miles around. This natural fortress, with its towering volcanic peaks rising 1,500 feet above the lagoon and multiple navigable passages through the reef, would become the stage for one of the most shocking military disasters in naval history. The story of this Pacific Gibraltar begins centuries before the first naval guns would thunder across its peaceful waters. In 1528, Spanish explorer Alvaro de Saavedra, aboard the Florida, became the first European to set eyes on these remote islands during his epic voyage across the uncharted Pacific. The Spanish would return again in 1565 when Alonso de Arellano sailed through these waters aboard the galleon San Lucas, officially claiming the Caroline Islands for the Spanish crown. However, Spain's grip on these distant islands remained tenuous at best, with no major settlements established and traditional island life continuing largely undisturbed for centuries. The colonial landscape shifted dramatically in 1899, when Germany, seeking to expand its Pacific empire, purchased the Caroline Islands from Spain for 25 million pesetas following Spain's defeat in the Spanish-American War. German rule would transform these sleepy tropical islands, but their time as colonial masters proved brief. When World War I erupted in 1914, Japan swiftly moved to seize Germany's Pacific territories, capturing Truk without resistance and establishing what would become one of the most strategically important naval bases in the Pacific theater. During the 1920s and 30s, as tensions mounted across the Pacific, Japan began the massive transformation of Truk Lagoon from a peaceful colonial outpost into a formidable military stronghold. The natural advantages were immediately obvious to Japanese naval strategists. The lagoon's immense size could accommodate hundreds of warships, while the surrounding coral reef provided perfect protection from both storms and enemy submarines. Multiple islands within the lagoon offered ideal locations for airfields, fuel storage, and defensive positions. Most importantly, Truk's strategic location placed it at the very heart of Japan's expanding Pacific Empire, perfectly positioned to control shipping lanes and launch operations across thousands of square miles of ocean. By 1939, the transformation was complete. Admiral Katagiri Aikichi established the Imperial Japanese Navy's 4th Fleet headquarters at Truk, with the seaplane tender Chitose serving as flagship. The base quickly expanded beyond all recognition. 5 major airfields and seaplane bases were constructed across the islands, capable of housing nearly 500 aircraft. Massive fuel storage facilities were carved into the volcanic rock, some holding hundreds of thousands of gallons of precious oil. Underground ammunition depots, repair shops, and communication centers sprouted across the islands. Defensive positions bristled with over 80 25mm anti-aircraft guns and larger 12cm coastal artillery pieces. When Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Truk Lagoon served as a crucial staging area for the assault. The fleet oiler Shinkoku Maru, along with 7 other tankers, had departed from Truk to refuel the Japanese task force that would devastate the American Pacific Fleet. In the months that followed, as Japanese forces swept across the Pacific like an unstoppable tsunami, Truk became the nerve center of Japan's military expansion. From this heavily fortified base, Japanese forces launched their attacks on Guam, Wake Island, and the Solomon Islands. The lagoon's harbors teemed with warships, transport vessels, and supply ships carrying the materials of war to battlefields across the Pacific. The importance of Truk reached its zenith in August 1942, when Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack and commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, established his headquarters aboard the massive battleship Yamato. This floating palace, the largest warship ever built, became the symbol of Japanese naval power as it sat majestically in Truk's protected waters. Over 37,000 Japanese personnel swarmed across the islands, transforming them into a bustling military metropolis that dwarfed the 9,000 native Chukese inhabitants. Yamamoto's presence at Truk elevated the base to legendary status among both Japanese and Allied forces. From his command center aboard Yamato, the admiral orchestrated naval operations across millions of square miles of Pacific Ocean. Intelligence reports reaching Allied headquarters painted an increasingly terrifying picture of Truk's growing strength. By 1943, reconnaissance suggested the base housed not just hundreds of aircraft and dozens of warships, but had been transformed into what Allied intelligence termed the Gibraltar of the Pacific, an impregnable fortress that blocked any advance toward the Japanese home islands. However, Yamamoto's reign at Truk would prove tragically brief. On April 18, 1943, American P-38 Lightning fighters, acting on intercepted radio communications, ambushed and shot down the Admiral's Betty bomber over Bougainville. Yamamoto's death sent shockwaves through the Japanese naval hierarchy and marked the beginning of a gradual decline in Japan's fortunes. Admiral Mineichi Koga replaced Yamamoto as commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, transferring his flag to Yamato's sister ship, Musashi, which became the new floating headquarters at Truk. By early 1944, the strategic situation had shifted dramatically. American forces, reinvigorated by their industrial might and growing naval power, were advancing steadily across the Central Pacific. The Gilbert and Marshall Islands had fallen to American amphibious assaults, bringing enemy forces dangerously close to Truk's outer defenses. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, and his subordinates began planning what many considered impossible just months earlier: a direct assault on Japan's most heavily fortified Pacific stronghold. Onowatitindiri. The man chosen to lead this seemingly suicidal mission was Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, a veteran naval aviator whose innovative tactics had revolutionized carrier warfare. Mitcher commanded Task Force 58, the most powerful naval striking force ever assembled. This floating armada consisted of 3 task groups built around 9 aircraft carriers: the fleet carriers Enterprise, Yorktown, Essex, Intrepid, and Bunker Hill, supported by 4 light carriers, Belleau Wood, Cabot, Monterey, and Cowpens. These floating airfields carried over 500 combat aircraft, including the deadly F-6F Hellcat fighters, SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. 7 battleships, including the mighty Iowa and New Jersey, provided devastating surface firepower, while cruisers and destroyers formed protective screens around the carriers. Intelligence gathering for the upcoming assault proved both crucial and dangerous. On February 4, 1944, 2 United States Marine Corps PB-4Y Liberator bombers launched from Bougainville in the Solomon Islands on an unprecedented long-range reconnaissance mission over Truk. Flying at high altitude through dangerous enemy airspace, these brave aviators captured photographs that stunned Allied planners. The images revealed a target-rich environment beyond their wildest expectations. Battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and dozens of merchant vessels crowded the lagoon's anchorages. Nearly 400 Japanese aircraft filled the airfields, representing the largest concentration of enemy air power in the Pacific. However, the reconnaissance flight also sealed Truk's fate. Japanese radar operators detected the American aircraft, and Admiral Koga immediately understood the implications. Within days, he ordered the evacuation of the combined fleet's most valuable units. The super battleships Yamato and Musashi, along with the precious aircraft carriers and most heavy cruisers, fled westward to Palau, over 1,000 miles away. This strategic withdrawal saved Japan's most irreplaceable warships, but it left behind dozens of smaller vessels, supply ships, and transport craft that could not escape in time. American planners, unaware of this massive evacuation, proceeded with their assault plans. Operation Hailstone would achieve multiple strategic objectives: neutralizing Truk's air power to prevent interference with the upcoming invasion of Eniwetok, demonstrating American naval supremacy, and delivering a crushing psychological blow to Japanese morale. The operation's name proved prophetic, as the coming assault would rain destruction upon Truk like the most devastating hailstorm in naval history. On February 16, 1944, as darkness fell across the Pacific, Task Force 58 took position 90 miles northeast of Truk Lagoon. The massive fleet had approached undetected, using intercepted Japanese radio traffic to avoid enemy patrol patterns. Admiral Mitcher had developed an innovative attack plan that would maximize destruction while minimizing American casualties. The assault would begin with a massive fighter sweep designed to eliminate Japanese air opposition, followed by continuous bombing attacks throughout the day. This relentless pounding would give the enemy no opportunity to regroup or launch effective counterattacks. At 4:43 in the morning on February 17, 1944, the most devastating naval air attack since Pearl Harbor began. In the pre-dawn darkness, 74 F-6F Hellcat fighters roared off the carrier decks, their powerful engines echoing across the Black Pacific waters. These sleek, deadly aircraft represented the pinnacle of American aviation technology, armed with 650 caliber machine guns and capable of speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. Japanese radar operators detected the incoming formation approximately 30 minutes before they reached their target. However, the warning came too late for effective defensive measures. Most Japanese aircraft remained on the ground, their crews caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of enemy fighters overhead. The parallels to Pearl Harbor were unmistakable and deeply ironic. Once again, aircraft caught their enemies by surprise at dawn, but this time, it was American planes delivering devastating retribution upon Japanese forces. The aerial battle that erupted over Truk Lagoon became the largest dogfights of World War II, with hundreds of aircraft engaged in deadly combat above the peaceful lagoon waters. Those Zero fighters that managed to scramble into the air found themselves hopelessly outmatched by the superior American Hellcats. The Japanese aircraft, once feared across the Pacific for their agility and range, had become obsolete by 1944. Their lightweight construction, which had provided advantages in the war's early years, now proved deadly liabilities against heavily armored American fighters, equipped with devastating firepower. Within hours, American fighters had swept the skies clear of enemy opposition. 50 Japanese aircraft fell to American guns in aerial combat, while another 100 were destroyed on the ground during strafing attacks on the airfields. Only 4 American fighters were lost in exchange, a kill ratio that demonstrated the overwhelming superiority of American pilots and aircraft. The once feared Japanese Air Force at Truk had been effectively eliminated in a single morning's combat. With air superiority secured, the main assault began in earnest. Wave after wave of American bombers descended upon the helpless Japanese fleet anchored in the lagoon. Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers screamed down from high altitude, their 1,000-pound bombs penetrating deep into enemy ships before exploding in massive fireballs. Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers skimmed just above the water's surface, launching their deadly fish into the hulls of Japanese vessels. The systematic destruction continued throughout the day, with 6 major strikes delivering 369,000-pound bombs, 498 500-pound bombs, and 70 torpedoes. The Japanese merchant fleet suffered catastrophic losses. The tanker Shinkoku Maru, veteran of the Pearl Harbor attack, took multiple torpedo hits and slowly settled to the lagoon floor. The massive transport Ikoku Maru suffered the most horrific fate when American bombs ignited ammunition stored in her forward hold, causing a tremendous explosion that literally blew the ship apart and killed over 900 men in seconds. Vessel after vessel fell victim to the relentless American assault. The Fujikawa Maru with her cargo of Zero fighter aircraft, the Heian Maru loaded with submarine supplies and spare periscopes, and dozens of other ships representing hundreds of thousands of tons of precious Japanese shipping. As darkness fell on February 17th, Admiral Mitcher introduced another devastating innovation. The first nighttime carrier attack in naval history. American aircraft launched after midnight on February 18th, their engines thundering through the darkness as they sought out targets illuminated by the fires of the previous day's destruction. This round-the-clock pounding gave the Japanese no respite and demonstrated American technological and tactical superiority. The second day of Operation Hailstone brought even more devastating attacks. Another 57 Hellcats swept across the lagoon at dawn, meeting only token resistance from the handful of surviving Japanese aircraft. Dive bombers and torpedo bombers continued their methodical destruction of Japanese shipping, sinking 27 additional vessels and bringing the total devastation to staggering proportions. The destroyer Fumitsuki, attempting to escape through the North Pass, fell victim to American bombs and settled in the deeper waters outside the reef. Perhaps most symbolically devastating was the destruction of Truk's fuel supplies. American bombers targeted the massive storage tanks on Dublin Island, creating towering columns of black smoke that rose thousands of feet into the tropical sky. Over 90% of Truk's precious fuel reserves went up in flames, effectively ending the base's ability to support major naval operations. By the morning of February 19th, when the last American aircraft departed, the scale of destruction was almost incomprehensible. 45 Japanese ships totaling over 220,000 tons had been sent to the bottom of Truk Lagoon, the largest two-day shipping loss in naval history. Over 275 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Japanese casualties exceeded 4,500 dead and wounded, while American losses remained remarkably light, 25 aircraft and approximately 70 airmen. The strategic impact of Operation Hailstone extended far beyond the immediate destruction. Truk's neutralization opened the entire Central Pacific to American advance, eliminating the need for a costly amphibious assault that could have claimed thousands of Allied lives. The psychological effect on Japanese morale proved equally devastating, as the myth of Truk's invincibility was shattered forever. The base that had symbolized Japanese naval power for over 2 years had been reduced to smoking ruins in just 48 hours. Most tragically for the Japanese war effort, the ships and supplies lost at Truk represented resources that could never be replaced. Japan's industrial capacity, already strained by years of warfare, simply could not rebuild the merchant fleet so catastrophically destroyed in the lagoon. The petroleum products, ammunition, spare parts, and military equipment that went down with the sunken vessels represented months of precious production lost forever. The aftermath of Operation Hailstone left Truk Lagoon forever transformed. The once bustling naval base fell silent except for the occasional American bombing raid designed to keep the installation neutralized. Japanese survivors, cut off from resupply, struggled to maintain basic defenses with dwindling resources. The mighty fortress that had once projected Japanese power across the Pacific became a forgotten backwater, bypassed by the war's advancing tide. For over 2 decades after World War II ended, Truk Lagoon's sunken fleet lay undisturbed beneath the crystal-clear waters. Local fishermen occasionally reported seeing the ghostly outlines of ships below the surface, but the wrecks remained largely unknown to the outside world. Oil slicks and gasoline fumes occasionally marked the grave sites of the sunken vessels, serving as lonely reminders of the tremendous destruction that had occurred. This underwater graveyard remained hidden until 1969, when French oceanographer Jacques Cousteau launched an expedition to explore the lagoon's depths. Cousteau had learned of the wrecks through a newspaper article by American journalist Charles Hillinger, himself a World War II veteran, who had witnessed the destruction from aboard American carriers during the attack. The timing proved fortuitous, as Cousteau's team became the first to systematically explore and document the incredible preservation of the sunken fleet. What Cousteau discovered beneath Truk Lagoon's waters astounded even his experienced diving team. The tropical conditions and lack of salvage operations had preserved the wrecks in almost pristine condition. Tanks still sat on cargo decks exactly where they had been loaded 25 years earlier. Bottles of sake remained unbroken in ships' galleys. 0 fighter aircraft, still in their shipping crates, filled the holds of transport vessels. Human remains, preserved by the lagoon's unique conditions, served as solemn reminders of the tremendous human cost of the battle. Cousteau's 1971 television documentary, titled Lagoon of Lost Ships, introduced the world to this incredible underwater museum. The haunting images of perfectly preserved warships resting in crystal-clear tropical waters captivated audiences worldwide and established Truk Lagoon as the premier wreck diving destination on Earth. However, Cousteau's expedition also sparked controversy, as his team removed numerous artifacts for study without sharing their discoveries with local authorities or the international community. Today, Truk Lagoon stands as both a diving paradise and a solemn memorial to the thousands who perished during Operation Hailstone. More than 60 major wrecks rest within the lagoon, representing the world's largest collection of accessible World War II shipwrecks. The vessels have become artificial reefs, their steel hulls now covered in colorful corals and tropical marine life. Divers from around the world make pilgrimages to swim through the holds of these ghostly ships, exploring cargo that includes tanks, trucks, aircraft, ammunition, and thousands of other artifacts from a war that ended 8 decades ago. The wrecks serve as powerful reminders of Operation Hailstone's devastating effectiveness and the terrible cost of warfare. Each sunken vessel represents not just tons of steel and cargo, but the dreams, hopes, and lives of the men who sailed them. The perfectly preserved artifacts speak silently of interrupted meals, unfinished letters home, and duties that would never be completed. Operation Hailstone stands as one of the most successful naval operations in history, demonstrating the evolution of carrier warfare from its experimental beginnings to devastating maturity. The operation proved that properly coordinated air power could neutralize even the strongest enemy positions, paving the way for the island-hopping campaign that would ultimately bring American forces to Japan's doorstep. The 48 hours of destruction at Truk Lagoon marked the beginning of the end for Japanese naval power in the Pacific, setting the stage for the eventual Allied victory that would follow just 18 months later.